Hello, I'm Henry Emmons, and welcome back to Joy Lab.
And I'm Aimee Prasek. We are in our element of recreation, recreation, kind of the word we're actually going to go with more, thinking about, this idea of how can we restore and nourish ourselves. And we are in this kind of ease phase of our rhythm here at Joy Lab, which we do every August, December, and April. We really try to tap into doing less, nourishing more, honoring our need for cycles of rest and activity. And so even though recreation can be active, it can definitely offer a break, I think, to our busy mind. Also our physical body too, as it helps us kind of release some rigidity if we're thinking about the play of recreation. And so we're looking at this element as something that with some support, some practice, can just really arise from us, this recreation.
Yeah, I think this is so important. This idea, people often talk about the value of slowing down and, giving our minds a chance to catch up with ourselves. And I think we intuitively recognize the importance of this, but still, as a whole, it seems culturally we've largely forgotten about it.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we often treat our bodies and our minds more like machines than the living systems that they actually are.
Right.
And we sometimes think that they should run at peak capacity all the time. So it really helps me to remember that we are embedded and a part of nature, the natural world. And all of the natural world lives according to rhythms. Our bodies are bound by these rhythms of life. And so if we look at nature, the seasons, there's especially living where we do, Aimee, in Minnesota, the season cycle between activity and dormancy, in nature at least. And it does kind of pull our bodies into a certain dormancy in the winter. The tides, if you live near the ocean, the tides ebb and flow, and our own bodies have an unmistakable circadian rhythm. Plus, rhythms that we sometimes ignore or aren't aware of, like hormone cycles, the smaller cycles of rest and activity during the course of a 24-hour day. And so, we just have this need to honor and listen to this rhythm. And what I often see is that the people who are most resilient, who are able to maintain better health and well-being over the long haul, are the ones who honor these rhythms. The people who don't push constantly, who rest when they need to rest, play when they need to play, work when it's time to work. In my own life, this is something I seem to need to learn repeatedly.
You're not alone.
I know it. I'm not alone, but I am kind of on one end of the spectrum, I think. Oh, gosh. Yeah, I just constantly push myself too hard. And then my body tells me, okay, we've got to kind of correct here.
Yeah.
So, I think many of us were taught this, right? We're taught that resting is laziness. If you're not optimizing your time, you're wasting it. There's always something more that we think we should be doing, which is all simply exhausting and eventually becomes counterproductive. So when we honor our natural rhythms, when we take real breaks, when we allow for restoration, our energy comes back. We have more creativity, more capacity to be productive and active when we choose to be. And there is just real wisdom in honoring our bodies and our biology.
Yeah, you're thinking about an episode we did on chronobiology. We talked about ultradian, circadian, and infradian rhythms. So I will put a link to that in the show notes. I think it's really helpful because that is just, man, we are built on those rhythms. So with recreation, I think it's a reminder that we're creating from what's right here, that there is really no other self-improvement or checklists or fixes that need to be added for you to tap into your goodness right now and this amazing creation that you are right now. And that no matter what's happening in your life or whatever diagnoses, that you are more than those things, and that there is goodness in you to tap into right now. And that's not self-indulgent or arrogant or naive to diagnoses or structural barriers, and it doesn't dismiss the growth and change that we can proactively create in our lives. It's more about just coming back to our foundation. So acknowledging that our foundation, our true self, really is good and resilient, and growth doesn't mean forward movement all the time. And so I think this is really essential consciously to check in on this, to give ourselves the space and to kind of shake up, to remember that the messaging that gets constantly thrown at us, particularly in the business of wellness, and all the self-improvement kind of messaging that gets hurled at us constantly, can actually push us toward this relentless optimization of ourselves that is unnecessary at best and can often be unhelpful, unhealthy, and most of the time it's optimization built on this tiny blueprint. So we are pressured, we're messaged, bullied into crafting this more palatable, more marketable version of ourselves that looks a certain way, hustles at a certain speed, eats a certain way, has this many wrinkles or muscles or supplements or whatever, just all to buy some products. It's exhausting. So this really is an opportunity to step back, to tap back in, to recreate, to nourish, to restore from our true self.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep a healthy perspective on this self-improvement, self-help industry you're referring to, because it is a huge trillion-dollar industry, and it seems to thrive on the one message that you are not good enough. You need to be fixed. You need to be improved somehow. And of course, there is real value in growth and learning. We're not saying anything is wrong with that. But there is a dark side to the relentless self-improvement that I think you're referencing, Aimee. So, it creates an impossible standard because no matter how much you improve, there is always more to do. If you lose weight, okay, then have you completely perfected your BMI? Are you right in the middle of that range? You improve some habits, but have you optimized your sleep, your diet, your exercise routine? You reach for one goal and there is immediately another one. This is a treadmill that never ends. And I think often this is rooted in shame and self-rejection. The core message being you're not okay as you are. And when you operate from that place, the belief that something is fundamentally wrong with you, I think it's harmful to our sense of self and even our nervous system. It keeps that stress response going, and it leads to burnout. This is not sustainable change. And I think importantly, this is often tied to someone else's idea of how we should be, not our own internal values. So we're not improving because it's important to us necessarily. It's because we think we should be better, because society or someone outside of ourselves is saying this to us. So that's exhausting in a way that I think is hard to really put into words even.
Yeah, I think it was Roger Abrahams that talks about how we've basically turned building a self into a kind of religion, which I think is interesting. It's this hyper focus on that triad of self-possession, self-fashioning, and self-expression as these kind of sacred moral acts. And on the surface, it's like, oh yeah, okay, well, that sounds good. This idea of self-possession and fashioning, expression, coming into who we are. But I think And that we should have autonomy on that, absolutely, building that. But it's also this message that we have to be constructed as if we're incomplete, that there's something missing until you build it, and that we have to display it in a certain way, in the right way. And then when we settle into that belief, it's just so much easier for us to get sucked into these messages from influencers and brands and algorithms that convince us, like, I know what's missing. Buy this, do this, show up like this, and all of it will be solved. That's the whole self-help economy, like in its dark side. Honestly, it only works if you believe you're a product, not a person. And I think recreation helps us to come back into that self that is not always being forced or believed, to be sort of on this treadmill of needing to always be optimizing, fashioning, expressing.
Mm-hmm. Well, this gets really tricky, doesn't it? It gets
does
really
get-
tricky because, I think what you're saying is so important, this difference between authentic self-creation versus creating a self for some form of external approval.
Yes.
And this whole idea of authenticity is one that we have delved into before, and it's really one of my favorite topics. But it's not easy, I don't think, to really know ourselves. There's just so much pulling us in other directions. So authentic self-creation obviously comes from within. And it means really understanding who you are, what matters to you, what feels really true. And boy, if you can approach that with some playfulness, which we're trying to draw ourselves toward with this whole topic on recreation, there's some real freedom in it then. So yeah, I do want to acknowledge too that this is not easy work. And I think particularly if you're part of a group that's marginalized, or if you feel that you don't quite fit into the cultural norms, there might be a really strong pull to conform, to kind of go with what the prevailing culture is telling us to do. And it's not easy to buck that trend. So, when we talk about recreation, about stepping back from this relentless optimization, in a sense, we're talking about a form of resistance, about creating spaces where you can be more fully yourself, less constrained by external expectations. And I think that's a genuine act of wellness. In fact, it's almost an act of rebellion.
Yes. Okay, two things. First, our authenticity series, I will put that in the show notes. I think that was January. So if you missed that, for sure, go back. 2, rebellion. Yes.
I thought you'd like that. You
Oh,
rebel,
yes.
you.
I know. I love it. Yes. So I want to take this in a weird way then, because you've opened the gates.
Of course.
So maybe it'll make sense with this element of recreation this month. I hope so. So let's talk about Phantasmagoria.
I've been so waiting to talk about Phantasmagoria.
Who hasn't? Lord. So this is, unless you already know, this is a concept from play researcher Dr. Brian Sutton-Smith. And it's nearly always
If
used.
anybody listening knows about this, I wanna hear from you.
Absolutely. I'd be curious. Yes, please let us know. I'd love to know why you know about this. I think it's fascinating. Now we're all going to know about this. So Sutton-Smith generally uses this term with kids, and how kids play in these kind of imaginative, wild, weird, irrational, sometimes dark ways. For example, I dropped my kiddo off at a camp for the first time. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. They were 4 or 5 years old, I think. So I'm kind of nervous already from the go, as this is her first camp. And because the camp was crazy. There were older kids there up to age 11, and there were just so many kids running wild. And I appreciate the idea of children. But
the idea of children.
I just don't want to be surrounded by a lot of them. Like cats, they make me nervous at times. They're so unpredictable, aren't we all? And so when I pick her up on that first day, she tells me about playing in the park. And one of the kids had a cut on her knee and was under one of the park platforms, pretending to be a vampire, and was literally sucking the blood from her knee. And then would chase the kids around saying, "It's your turn."
Oh.
And she told me about, this is like perfect Phantasmagoria, okay? But for me, as I said, I didn't know a lot of kids. I knew even less kids at that time. And I was like, whoo, that kid's a red flag. What is going on? I wanted to tell my kid, like, stay away from the vampire kid.
Vampire.
But then I paused and I thought, okay, maybe this is like some normal behavior. And sure enough, as I got to know more kids and dug into the research and found this concept of Phantasmagoria, I realized, yes, kids can play in some really weird, sometimes dark ways. Of course, there's a line, where those behaviors might be signaling something else going on, but often it's just normal play. And as I learned more about this, I also remembered some of the, quote, weird stuff I would do too. And I was a difficult kid, at least until I was 6 or so. And one of the things I was super into was playing dead. And not like roll over family dog kind of stuff, like as realistic as I could, kind of these dying scenes to see how other people would react. Honestly, I don't know if that's normal. I don't care. I think our normal spaces are too small, but it was definitely some Phantasmagoria going on there. I remember I scared my mom so bad in the car. She had to pull over on the freeway and open the door and like shake me. Oh God, it was bad because I had done this whole dying scene. That was one of many.
Good one.
Oh God, karma's going to roll around. Hopefully not too bad for me, but with being a parent now. But what's so interesting about the why of this Phantasmagoria is that it serves a purpose. It can help us work through our feelings, really. Like the vampire kid and I were probably working through some death, mortality, some like existential questions. Maybe, right? So Sutton-Smith notes that one key reason kids do this is that it can kind of help them deconstruct reality. That this kind of play is trying to understand a complex world by kind of like deconstructing or breaking down the pieces, the systems, the rules they see in the world, and then rebuilding them in these different ways with their imagination and playing with these different scenarios. Sutton-Smith also leans on French philosopher Jacques Derrida's philosophy of deconstruction by noting that if we imagine the world as a text, then play is our response to that text. It's like how we read it, how we read the world, and how we rewrite it. So we're an audience and a bit of a co-author. I kind of like that. And play is like how we do that. It's a way to interact with the text. So unlike trying to make sense of the world just by watching the news and then shouting the messages we've been sold on social media or whatever, play is this kind of deconstruction and reassembly of the world that offers some creativity, some autonomy, and a chance for critical thinking and problem solving even. Because particularly with Phantasmagoria, kids might be playing with deconstructing and assembling the stuff that feels unfair or scary in a rigid world. And that's really powerful because kids can gain a little sense of, okay, I can navigate this. I can work through the stuff that might be cruel or unfair or damaging and play with it in very creative ways to try and make sense of it. It's like a processing strategy. And I'd argue it's something that can support psychological resilience, empathy as kids play in the different roles as well, and curiosity, critical thinking. To quote play specialist Dr. Fred Donaldson, he noted children learn as they play, most importantly, in play, children learn how to learn. Love that. Children learn how to learn. And this relates to adults. We do not lose this strategy or desire to play, to learn, and to help make sense of the world. It is wired in us. Take Phantasmagoria again. Like, think for a moment. We license this stuff to certain socially acceptable areas in our life. Like, let them pop. I'm sure you're like, oh, maybe Halloween, Woodstock, Burning Man, horror movies, fandom stuff, daydreaming even. Like, we tuck this Phantasmagoria into these little spaces where they get deemed appropriate. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but we then make those spaces the only times when we play. And really play in a way that we are authoring the experience, where we have this kind of autonomy and we're playing with reality in a way that helps process this wildlife. And I think when we make it so rare, when play is so rare in our lives, then we just pocket it into these little rare bits, and it can make it more extreme and unhealthy, harmful kind of ways of play when we just like tuck it into these tiny moments. Then we play real hard, can get into some trouble. So we need to bring it back into our lives in a healthy amount. We crave it. We need it. I love this Jung quote, the question that he asks: the small child is still around and possesses a creative life, which I lack, but how can I make my way to it? So let's explore that. We'll explore that through this element of recreation, recreation. And it doesn't have to be by doing anything you think is weird or dark or whatever. You don't have to do a dying scene in front of people to see how they respond. But let's explore this idea of play more broadly, with less rules, perhaps, and do it more frequently. And a kind of play where you are authoring the experience if possible. So it could be gardening or LARPing, woodworking, any kind of art, acting, world building board games, writing, cooking, music, even sports. If you can have a little less attachment to winning and more attention to tapping into the flow of movement and playing with others. So to do this, maybe ask yourself, if you're not sure, how can I start playing? What's one way of playing or an activity from your childhood that if you tried for just 2 minutes today would offer you a bit of recreation? So an activity, some creation of this experience, some empowerment, what might offer you some aliveness, and answer any bit of that with a little bit of play.
I love the Carl Jung quote that you brought up. Well, he had a lot going on, didn't he?
I know. I need to read more Jung. But yeah, there is something very deep in us that asks that question.
Yeah. Yeah. I like where he was going with it. How can I make my way to it? To that creative life that we had as children. And I think what he's pointing to is that something happens when we become adults. We learn the rules. We learn what's acceptable, what's productive, and we think of time and the value of time in a very different way. And I think we lose something really precious in this process. We lose the permission to play without a purpose, or to imagine without constraints, just to create things because they're fun, not because they're useful or productive or marketable. So Jung seems to be saying that this creative, playful part of us doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear. It just kind of gets quiet and goes into the background, kind of gets tucked away. And when we give ourselves permission to access it again, if we color or build something or move our body in a way that feels good, we have no other goal than that. Or if we tell really ridiculous stories or play music just for the joy of it, something shifts when we do these things. The playful mind is incredibly resourceful. And when we're in that state of play, we can access parts of our brain that don't get activated when we're striving or caught up in self-judgment. So we become more creative, more flexible, more open to possibility. that's not a waste of time. It's accessing some of our deepest capacities.
Yeah. I'm thinking of an episode we did about like the worst way to ruin your hobby would be to turn it into a business, which is the driving force of like every self-help
Oh
influencer
boy.
financial business BS.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I'll find the episode, but it was really about intrinsic motivation too. And it just kind of what you were saying there, Henry, reminds me of the power of play too, to generate that intrinsic motivation, that it's not productivity focused. It's not externally motivated. It's this drive from within, and tapping into that through play is super powerful.
Beautiful.
So I'll link that in the show notes. The show notes are going to be full of like great next episodes for you this month. So that'll be awesome. So go where you'd like to create that path. The other thing I want to highlight about the kids too, and what we can learn from them, is that this kind of recreation is most often social. This kind of recreation that we're talking about now, this recreation, and it sounds kind of funny because it's not the usual self-optimization or self-care routines that can lean toward that relentless tinkering that we've talked about, that optimization. But that also leans toward isolation. So recreation, tapping into your true self through this play that we're talking about, is just not really a solitary project in most cases. It's not more self. It's actually more about self-forgetfulness and connecting. We talked about self-forgetfulness in episode 270, a handful back. The idea is that we look up from what can be often this kind of negative preoccupation with ourselves, just kind of be blinded by that negative preoccupation of self. We can take a break from the constant self-monitoring and self-judgments and go beyond ourselves. That's what self-forgetfulness is about. And play, recreation is a really effective way to do that. There's a concept we've talked about here before as well called flow, which is much of Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work. How we can move into this state of flow where there's a loss of self-consciousness. There's a forgetfulness of other realities, to quote Csikszentmihalyi. Loss of self-consciousness, yes. I mean, think of the last time you played, whatever it was. How did you feel? Were you constantly self-monitoring and self-criticizing? Probably not. So the flow research, which honestly is pretty much the play research for adults, has found that this state of flow is consistently linked to higher subjective well-being, to creativity, as you noted, Henry, reduced stress responses. There is some playfulness research where adults are forced to play and then studied. It's so funny. You can't just observationally find much of this. But the outcomes are similar. Playfulness is linked to higher scores on feelings of purpose in life, positive relations with others, resilience, more positive emotions, even when adults are forced to play. I find that so funny. Like, we have to practice play, just like we practice all these elements of joy that we work on. Play doesn't have to be spontaneous either. We can practice it consciously, thoughtfully. So this month we are recreating. We are not reinventing, not optimizing. We're not improving. We are recreating what is good in you, letting it rise up, letting it blossom and support you. So let's start like simply with just 2 minutes per day as a goal, and play like a kid in the 80s or 90s or before, like no TV, no phone, no device, not because they're bad, but because the point is for you to author your experience, not some algorithm or program trying to suck you in and tell you something or sell you something. So maybe coloring, writing a song, poem, shooting baskets, gardening, looking for bugs, stopping around your backyard like a dinosaur, whatever, playing with your dogs. Just play in a way that maybe you used to when you were little. Start there and let it evolve. It doesn't have to be phantasmagoric. I don't know if that's a word. It can be whatever. And then with some minutes under your belt, think about how you might make it a little more social. Maybe you invite a friend to color with you, or just go shoot baskets in public, like at a public park. You don't need to play pickup or anything, just out in the world with the opportunity to say hi to someone. Or consider joining a club that does the thing you want to start playing with. And there are all kinds of clubs. And maybe the club is online. That's cool. Like pick a IRL hobby, a play, something that you're engaging in, an IRL recreation, and then connect via an online club if you need. And if you're into what others might think is some weird thing, I can almost guarantee you there is someone else thinking the exact same thing, and they've started a club for it. As long as it's not harmful to you or someone else, then let that phantasmagoria, if that's what you're feeling, let it help you play and help you make sense of what is a complex existence. Be that weird, wonderful kid that you are. That kid is in all of us, just waiting to play.
Okay. So, Aimee,
Are you going to share a weird thing you did now?
No, I'm stuck on the vision of shooting baskets and in a public park, and I'm imagining you and I doing that together. And do you think we could really keep competitiveness out of it?
Probably not. No. There's some ways of playing that you might have to put aside if they make you too competitive. We could. Maybe horse.
Maybe if we were really conscious of it, we could.
Yeah, let's try
it. We should try it.
We'll circle back on that.
Okay.
I'll let people know how it went.
But I also think there's something quite profound in what you're describing about self-forgetfulness and connection. If you notice what happens when you're truly at play in the flow, you stop thinking about yourself.
Yeah.
What a relief.
Right.
You stop worrying about how you look or whether you're doing it right or whether people are judging you. It's almost as if you stop thinking, period. You just play. And the internal critic quiets down. The anxiety settles. You are just present and alive. That sounds so liberating to me. And then when you're playing with others, even casually, just shooting baskets in a park, for example, there's a connection that happens. It's different from our usual networking or relationship building or whatever we call it in the adult world, because the stakes are lower. And that it leaves more room for authenticity, more humor and spontaneity. And isn't that really what community is? Where you're doing something together that you enjoy and connection just happens naturally. I also want to emphasize what you said, Aimee, about no phones, no devices. They just hijack our attention, which is a very different thing than genuine play. So yeah, start with just a few minutes. I'm gonna say 5 to 10. I'm gonna go crazy here. But even 2 minutes, like you suggested, with no devices, do it and just notice what happens.
Yeah. Start with 2, work it up. 5 or 10. I'm remembering, I think I shared my solitaire problems that I had with my my phone game. That was a solitaire issue that I was playing for like 4 hours one day, and I came out of a stupor. Your note, Henry.
4 hours, huh?
Oh, that was just one night. Just, check into, so your note about devices, how it splits attention. I think what's interesting about that type of gaming or devices where you're not authoring the experience, you can kind of zone out, and you might come out of the experience feeling kind of depleted, kind of exhausted in a like, what just happened sort of way, which is very different than if you were playing in a way where I think you can fully engage and come into that flow state where you're really like your full attention is in the experience. I'm not sure you can really get that as much with single kind of gaming or Candy Crush or Solitaire on your phone. So do check in as well. After you're done playing, how do you feel? How do you feel emotionally, cognitively, physically after playing? And identify the ways of playing that nourish you. It's going to be different for all of us. So that's what we're doing. We are recreating this month. We are recreating. We're playing. Let it be so unproductive and relish in that. And as we do in these more laid back months, so to speak, at Joy Lab, we'll replay some key past episodes that will help you recreate, that will help you in this element of recreation, to learn more about the power of play, to tap more into your playful nature, to embrace these cycles of rest and activity that we need. And Joy Lab program members, we've got some short, sweet visualization and meditation experiments for you each week that'll support you as you recreate, as you nourish, as you restore. So to close us today, I want to share another bit of wisdom from Carl Jung. He wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct."
Thank you for listening to the Joy Lab podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, visit joylab.coach to learn more about the full Joy Lab program. Be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Please remember that this content is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to provide medical advice and is not a replacement for advice and treatment from a medical professional. Please consult your doctor or other qualified health professional before beginning any diet change, supplement, or lifestyle program. Please see our terms for more information.